Hello, Garland Nixon here. It's Friday morning. We're hanging out with Joti Brar. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here. Sorry about that. My plug popped off of my Mac. All right, now we're getting somewhere. I'm back in the picture. Joti, let's start here. Certainly, we're certainly happy to have you. We missed a week. I was out of, believe it or not, so I was out of town, and I literally did like the show from my truck. I was like sitting in my truck, and I had the thing up here, and people in the chat saying, I think Garland's been evicted. I think he's living in his truck now. No, I think he's on the run. The FBI's after him. And I'm like, no, it's all of the above.
Is that why you got your suit on today?
Yeah, right. Thank you very much. Yes, I want to look like, if you're not smart, just like put on a suit and a pair of glasses and people think you're smart. So that's my plan. At any rate, now we get to listen to someone who really is smart. Joti, before we get into the horrors of fascism and imperialism in the EU, which unfortunately, even though they claim the Brits aren't in the EU, you have to deal with this every day of your life. There was a terrorist attack in the Kashmir region between India and Pakistan. And I immediately thought of you because I know you know the history of British imperialism intricately well. And I thought, okay, J.D. Vance just happened to be wandering around the region at the exact time that it happened. I know that the way things are going with India, the U.S. is pressuring India right now to help them to go against China. Certainly, Pakistan's an important part of the Belt and Road initiative, which has been attacked by terrorists. One of the Pakistani officials recently just came out, interestingly enough, and said that, basically a black mark on Pakistan's record is that they've helped the West, the US and the Brits, with terrorism. That they have been, a go-between and helped them with some of these terrorist organizations. And he said, Pakistan would be far better off had we not done that, etc. To no one's surprise who understood what was going on there. But your thoughts on, I'm highly suspect that this was just some random terrorist group, knowing the history of British and US imperialism in the region. But you know it far better than I do. Maybe you can kind of warm us up on a bit of the history of why there's a Pakistan, how the Brits fit into that, and all of that stuff. Thanks a lot, Joti.
Thanks, Garland. It's interesting that admission from a Pakistani official, rather late recognition of the fact that Pakistan has in fact shot itself in the foot by serving the American agenda in the region, as well as betraying not just its own people, but the people of Afghanistan, and the bloodbath that ensued there, and the fact that Pakistan played a shameful role in facilitating all of that. But it's a valuable admission nonetheless, because it's a realization, even by elites in that part of the world, that allowing themselves to be tools of imperialist policy ends up even biting the ones who think they're benefiting from it locally in the arse. And so, I'm glad that came out. You have to send me a link to where that quote is, so I can point my readers to it later. But
it's RT.
Yeah.
Pakistan did the dirty work for the rest. Their defense minister called out the West and the U.S. in particular for its role in security tensions. Asif admitted that Islamabad did the dirty work for the Western powers for decades. We have been doing this dirty work for the United States for about 3 decades, and the West, including Britain. He added that this was a mistake. If we had not joined the war against the Soviet Union and the war after 9/11, Pakistan's track record would have been unimpeachable. He goes on lots more, but I'll send you the link. But you can see.
Thank you.
I find that interesting. Okay, go ahead.
And he points out that started all the way back in the Soviet period, right? Which is also very important for people to understand. The Afghan war didn't actually begin in 2001. The war against the sovereign and independent Afghanistan started all the way back in 1978, 79, 1980. And it was always to do with the imperialists' determination to keep hold of this geostrategic location, to stop the people there running their own affairs and becoming independent and sovereign and socialist leaning, Soviet aligned, all of those things. So, you know, that's something to understand. And the role of Pakistan in that was truly horrible, criminal. But the whole, I think that, you know, when you look at Kashmir, it's not something that I've studied hugely in depth and not lately, but to have a broad overview of what goes on the Indian subcontinent, you have to recognize that when Britain left India, they deliberately left it divided. They drew lines on maps. They had spent decades fomenting communal strife between different religious groups, in particular Hindus and Muslims, right? And they used that as part of their general divide and rule strategy, but they heightened it very much in the decades leading up to Indian independence, knowing that they were going to be fundamentally, or at the last, they were going to be kicked out. It became very much a part of their strategy that they didn't want to leave a whole united and socialist-leaning India. So they did everything in their power to, number one, decapitate the communist movement. They executed, imprisoned, and generally got out of the way the leading communists across the Indian subcontinent. That was the one thing. Another thing they did was stir up, and to fever pitch really, communal divisions in India. And then when they left on the basis of partition. So they drew the lines on the map, and having whipped up this fever of communal kind of hatred, they drew their lines and they ran away and left the people of the subcontinent deal with this sudden new reality that they had two new governments on the territory, three territories split into three pieces, and you know, Indians fighting Indians to get to where they thought they were going to be safe from what was suddenly the other side amongst their own people. I've talked to you before about the fact that my father, Joti Brar, grew up in a village very close to the border in partition in Punjab, and his first schooling was in a madrasa, the local village Muslim school, because the village was more than half Muslim population. At the time of partition, he was just a little boy. He'd only been in the school a year or two, and his best friend, Muslim friend, you know, disappeared from his life. His village, his community was ripped apart. The Muslims were all fleeing for safety. There was pogroms going on both sides. His family were Sikhs, but they put a lot of effort into trying to protect their Muslim friends and help them get safely across the border. But it was bloodshed on a horrific scale left by the British, and the whole purpose of it was to make sure that the Indian subcontinent remained weak and therefore hyper exploitable, and didn't fulfill its potential to become a rising power in the world. After all, it's home to a huge number of people, a huge amount of raw materials, a territory that's, you know, got everything you need to be a really flourishing and prosperous united state. And so they did what they could to stop that. And the whole function of Pakistan is to make sure that India has a permanent enemy, and Pakistan likewise, and to make sure within those countries, you know, religious minorities always feel anxious and can be used as a scapegoat. So the Indian ruling class, you know, the British made sure they decapitated, you know, the communists, and they handed over the country on both sides of the border to bourgeois politicians who have continued this communal politics. In every part of India you go to now, people are voting on the basis of religion. That's a legacy of the British that the subsequent ruling class of India has not done away with. In fact, they've doubled down on it. That's how they keep their power. And it's to the great detriment of India's development, India's social cohesion, the Indian working masses' ability to actually get free, that they're constantly being pointed at each other and terrified with, the threat of in India, it's the Muslims, and, the Muslims constantly terrified with pogroms. And this threat of, Pakistan, our enemy Pakistan, has been a great boon to the Indian ruling class, to the Pakistani ruling class, and especially to imperialism. And Kashmir has also been a victim of that. Kashmir was a state that was, Muslim majority population, but with a Maharaja, I think, I get some of this wrong, but I think the Maharaja was a Hindu. The Kashmiri people at the time of partition were happy to be with India. India was supposed to be a multi-religious, multi-ethnic, multinational state set up on a basically secular lines. And in the early days, there was no particular problem with Kashmir or any other state of India feeling like kind of hard done by. But in recent times, the Kashmiris have been treated badly by the central Indian government. It's a very stupid policy because, of course, it gives a huge amount of opportunity for Pakistan to come in and make trouble there and create a secessionist movement. And the imperialists have assiduously backed this. My basic kind of overall feeling about Kashmiri separatism is it's not a particular progressive demand, because it's not just a question of, are the Kashmiris a nation? There are lots of national groups inside India. It's a question of looking at the overall situation for the Kashmiris themselves and for the world. What will be the result of an independent Kashmir? The result will be a US base in the middle of the Himalayas, where they would very much like one. They'd like one in Tibet, they'd like one in Nepal. They're constantly stirring things up, trying to get their feet in, and that is essentially what would happen. So I think it's right for the Kashmiris to demand that the Indian government treats them with dignity and respect, equality, and stops having all these special measures and all the rest of it. It's right for the Pakistanis to be asked to stop stirring up, hatred there. They're all playing communal games and geopolitical games with one another, and the imperialists are absolutely involved. So I don't know anything about this particular latest event, but, this constant, and of course the people there suffer. They're endlessly, being stirred up in, again, sectarian and communal ways, and made to feel that, their problems are something to do with religion when they are not. Right. And that the answer is going to be, if we just had independence, we would be able to practice our religion freely. And, we'll have a nice Islamic, homeland, and everything would be fine. That's not what would happen. And it's not really the root cause of anybody's problems up there. So let's just kind of give a bit of a historical overview. But in recent times, I always look for signs of rapprochement between India and Pakistan, and between India and China. For me, the fact that imperialism has been able to create these divides and exacerbate them constantly has been to the great detriment of all the people of Asia. And anything that can be done, even under the present governments and everything that's wrong with them in India and Pakistan, if that can be done, it will really change the geopolitical landscape in Asia, and it will change the prospects for the people of the region, even before they've managed to get themselves organized for socialist revolution, which is ultimately what they need, right? But even in this present situation, their ability to stand up to imperialism will be greatly enhanced if they can just come together. And there have been signs, little signs, but you see constantly, every time there's a move forward, you see the imperialists come rushing in and try to push it back again. And that shows you how much it matters to them that India, Pakistan, and China remain divided, and how important it is to, progressive people, anti-imperialist people, human-focused people in the world to want there to be rapprochement between Pakistan and India and between India and China. It does nobody any good for these sores to continue to fester and for military confrontation to be constantly encouraged. We need these countries cooperating with one another under the aegis of BRICS and the new Belt and Road and all of those projects that can really help to bring genuine development and prosperity for the peoples, instead of them wasting their lives and their resources on helping the imperialists stay dominant.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned the divide and conquer rule and how religion is so often used. I saw a video a while back about Ukraine, and I just thought, well, this is weird, because they were going in and taking out the Russian Orthodox churches, right? And what's interesting is, after the war started, there's been this cultural attack, right? We've got to go in, and you can't read Russian books, you can't speak in Russian, you can't worship, you know what I mean? And I thought, the Slavic people, you know, some have argued that Ukrainian is almost a dialect of Russian, right? And they have so much in common. It seems that the imperialists, when going in, they got their war started and they said, okay, we've got to A, divide them even further, but B, give them more things to fight about. And the argument right now, the so-called Ukrainians, we want to take Crimea back. Well, wait a minute. All the people in Crimea speak Russians for the most part, almost all of them, and they all worship at they're a Russian Orthodox Christian. And by the way, we want to take all the eastern regions back, who are also speaking Russian and worship in the Russian Orthodox Church. So what you're telling us is, you want to take millions and millions of people back whose language is outlawed and their religion is outlawed, and you want to bring them back into your country for some, you know, to do good, to do the right thing, because you have a right to what? Kill them and oppress them all? It's interesting that looking at the Ukrainian conflict and seeing the reflections of imperialism worldwide, where it's like you can see it right there in this one little ant farm almost, exactly what they do and how they do it.
You know, it's really a sign of imperialism's weakness, not its strength, that it is forced to use proxy forces for almost all of its warfaring nowadays. It can't motivate its own people to join the army, to fight voluntarily. It's very nervous of conscription. We know why. Conscription can have a very boomerang effect, let's say, on the country concerned, when it's fighting aggressive, unjustified wars. On the other hand, if you are conscripting people for wars they feel to be just, that they feel that where they're on history's side, they're on the right, you have no problem mobilizing and conscripting the whole population. The problem is, for the imperialists, that's not the kind of wars they're fighting. There was only one war they ever fought where they were able to have that narrative, and it was only after the Soviet Union entered that war, that was the Second World War, from 1941 onwards, it was easy to mobilize the peoples all across the imperialist heartlands for that fight against fascism and to protect the socialist motherland. That was actually what brought the mass of the people across the world into that fight in a voluntary way, that then they really gave their all. That's why we have these folk memories, probably less in the States, but certainly in Britain and Europe, of the war spirit, of everybody pulling together across the class divides, because the ruling class were fighting for their empire, but the working class didn't feel like they were fighting to defend the British Empire. They felt like they were fighting to beat fascism and defend the Soviet Union. Most of the time, when the imperialists are mobilizing for war, they're unjust wars. They sacrifice their own people in huge numbers in order to protect their ability to loot, and the workers get nothing in response for their service and their sacrifice. So at this point in time, it's a very hard. This point in time, where the economic crisis is creating a situation where the mass of workers in the Western countries, their living standards are getting worse all the time. Poverty is massively on the increase. Inequality has become obscene in the home front, never mind internationally. Internationally, it's so off the charts, it's insane. But even at home, the inequality has become really obscene and in people's face, very, very, very glaring. The difficulties of ordinary life for masses of workers are becoming really, really intractable. And this is a problem which is growing very rapidly. Numbers of people in Britain, I know, who are falling into real poverty are growing very fast and all the time. You know, we have huge numbers of kids now going to school hungry, huge numbers of people living in temporary accommodation. And temporary accommodation means like one squalid room in an unsafe B&B where women and children have been attacked, you know, mothers have been raped, you know, because they're not properly, they don't have any security or protection, and all kinds of people are thrown in together without any kind of security or oversight or, you know, care for their needs. Loads of families living in one room like that, very squalid situation. So Britain has done a good job of like hiding its homelessness crisis by creating these kind of temporary accommodation system. But the reality is that homelessness is massively growing in Britain, as it is across the Western world. As the crisis of imperialism deepens, all these problems are getting worse for people, and they don't feel particularly motivated to fight for king and country. And so the imperialists are using proxy forces. Now they've worked out that people fight better if they feel motivated ideologically. They've learned that from the communists. So they create, what's the ideology with which the imperialists try to ideologically motivate their foot soldiers? It's basically ethno-supremacy, it's fascism. They give a group, they choose a group, they give them an ideology that says, in some way or other, you're God's chosen people, you're special, you're superior than the people that we want to point you at. So it's always a group that's chosen to target a particular enemy, right? A particular group that the imperialists regard as a problem. They're not an enemy of ordinary people. They're seen as a problem by the imperialists because they're in the way of imperialist total domination. They're somehow standing up for themselves. They're somehow sovereign. They might be socialist. They might just be independent. But they're seen as a blocker to the imperialist ability to just super exploit and control. And so we see that in Ukraine, and the story of Ukrainian nationalism being manipulated by imperialist powers goes all the way back to before World War I. And they never stopped. Different imperialists took over at different times. It was first the British, then it was the Germans used them against the Soviets, then it was the British again, then it was the Americans, you know. But Ukrainian nationalism as an anti-Bolshevik force and then an anti-Russian force has been a long-term investment, if you like, of the imperialist powers of the West. Because they always wanted to destroy the Soviet Union, and now they want to destroy, balkanize, and loot Russia. But they don't just do it in Russia. They do it all over the map. And they don't just do it with Orthodox Christianity in Ukraine. They do it with every religion. So go to, so with Tibet, they'll use Buddhism. With Palestine, they'll use Judaism for Zionism, right? So an ethno-supremacist ideology that is anti-Arab and says that Jews are God's chosen people, and anybody you kill, it doesn't matter because, you know, they're just Untermenschen. They don't count. They're there to be either cheap labor or to be killed because they're in your way and their land should be taken. It's exactly the same ideology the Nazis had when they were going east towards what they call the Slavic peoples, you know. It's the same thing. And we see it with the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, okay? Anti-Chinese ethno-supremacism based on Islam. We see it with ISIS, ISIL, HTS, whatever you want to call them, Al-Qaeda in Syria. You know, ethno-supremacism based on a certain type of Islam that's been weaponized and perverted. So in each case, they're taking something out of the religion and warping it, weaponizing it, giving it to a group, brainwashing basically poor and uneducated members of a population who are feeling resentful because they're having a hard time economically. They find those people, they brainwash them, they give them weapons, they give them money, and they point them at the enemy. They do it with the South Koreans, the South Korean, puppet state to be an anti-communist force against the North and against China. And they're doing it in Taiwan with the people trying to create. And the crazy thing in Taiwan is there's no difference at all between Chinese people in Taiwan and Chinese people in China, but yet they're still trying to create a kind of national mentality and a national ideology that says we're not like the Chinese, we're Taiwanese, and there's a difference. And they're, again, trying to create this proxy force that's ideologically motivated, armed, and paid. And that's an important part. One of the ways they're able to get these mercenaries, that of course they want them ideologically motivated, but they do have to pay them, and they pay them a lot. If we look at what happened in Syria, the Syrian people were tremendously steadfast in conditions of utter strangulation, where by the end, members of the Syrian Arab army defending Syria's sovereignty and territory against all of these invaders were getting salaries of something like, some of them like $10 a month, right? While the HTS head choppers, this scum that have been pulled out of, all over Europe and given a license to commit any kind of crime and guns to do it with, were being paid $2,000 a month. At a certain point, this money talks. And this is where we have to be aware of the continued dangers of imperialism, even as it gets weaker. Because on the one hand, in many respects, they're bankrupt. But on the other hand, they've got this trick of, even though they're bankrupt, they keep printing money. When they print money, they create inflation for all of us. So our lives get harder and harder, but it allows them to keep going around the world and paying all their mischief makers. And their mischief makers, some of them are armed, some of them are in civil society NGOs. They've got all these networks of ways to intervene and interfere in people's states. I sometimes hear people sort of laughing about how ridiculously small the armies of Western Europe are. And I think we have to be a little bit careful when we're doing that, because yes, they are laughably small because they don't fight their own wars anymore. They've got more generals than privates, it seems like sometimes. But there's a reason for that. The reason is the job of these generals is to go around the world and give instruction to other forces who are doing the dirty work of Anglo-American imperialism. So it's not like just delusional that their army looks like that. This is the situation they're in. This is how their forces have been shaped. The British, I know, they specialize in dirty ops and training people for underhand activities, and they specialize in psychological operations. They specialize in dictating to proxy forces. So, for example, with the criminal war against Yemen that started back in, I'm going to get the year wrong, 2012, 2013,
something like that.
Then.
Yeah.
Yes, that was presented to us as a Saudi Arabian war. Well, what did we find out as the war went on? That the control room was being run by British and American officers. Now, in many, many places around the world, you will find the same thing is happening. It's like the government of Colombia fighting terrorism. What that actually means is a control room where Colombian army are overseen by the American army to fight communists. That's actually what was happening in Colombia, right? So, this is never reported or hardly reported in our newspapers. Every now and again, the back pages of The Guardian or The Independent might have a little story. Most people never see it. It's certainly not repeated on the front page. It's certainly not on the nightly TV. We have 24-hour news and they don't have segments on this type of thing, right? They have segments. They have endless, what is essentially kind of gossip and diversion. But they don't tell us about the real balance of forces. They don't tell us the real role that our armies and our secret services and our NGOs, those that based in our countries, are playing around the world. And so we are really, unless you take a lot of time and energy and effort to start to enlighten yourselves, you're really operating blind when trying to work out what the flip is going on in the world.
I notice in Europe now, Yeah, and I brought up the names, the Kaja Collises, the Vonderland, the now Mertz, all these people whose grandparents or whatever the heck or parents were literal Nazis involved in the Fourth Reich. And they're saying, well, we can't let this other party, when the people say we want to vote for somebody else, they say we can't let this other party come in because they're Nazis. The AFD, whoever the heck, the French National Front. Not that I'm defending any of those parties, but I find it odd that at the same time they're sending weapons to people who are goose stepping around with Nazi tattoos all over them. They're saying we've got to defend our population from Nazis. Oh, by the way, if our population wants something, they can't have it because they don't get anything we don't tell them to get, and they're going to get poverty, they're going to experience poverty and pain and devastation. We're going to have to get rid of all of the social safety net so that we can prepare for a big war with Russia, because, hey, that's what we need to do now. It's in the best interest of our population to keep you safe from Nazis, whatever the hell. None of it makes sense. But your thoughts on, and I've had somebody say to me recently from Europe, he said, man, there's going to be like a bloody revolution in Europe, that people here are going to eventually, when they realize what the hell's going on and they feel with so much pain, they're going to flip out. And I saw a video of a guy in the UK who was saying, young guy saying, we're not going to go fight a war for Starmer and these people. We hate them. If we do anything, we'll fight a war right here in London and throw them out. And I'm like, oh boy, we're starting to hear the seeds of a revolution. Your thoughts on that? This rise of poverty, total disdain for even the veneer of democracy. They're like, we're not going to pretend anymore. We'll just arrest our opposition and move on as the people suffer more and more. Your thoughts?
So you've pinpointed something that really is emblematic of the period we're living in, Garland, which is this crisis of legitimacy for Western democracy. And it's come from two sources. On the one hand, it's the steady attack and dismantlement of all of the gains won by workers after World War II, so that we're returning much more to the situation we had before World War II, which is where there are privileges for some of the workers in the West, but the mass of the workers sink down into a condition of life that's much more like the condition of workers in the whole of the rest of the world, i.e. extremely, extremely low, below the poverty line, hand to mouth, homelessness and utter immiseration become, totally widespread, no meaningful access to education, healthcare, all of those things we thought we'd got forever, right? So you have this on the one hand, and both of these things come from the crisis of capitalism. The global overproduction crisis is fueling, on the one hand, an attack on workers' pay, on their conditions, on the social wage that the ruling class doesn't want to have to fork out for anymore because they're trying to restore profitability. And on the other hand, the drive to war and the fact that these wars have been so unpopular, the fact that because these wars dragged on a long time, like Iraq and Afghanistan, they exposed cracks, disagreements amongst the ruling class. And because of that, there were leaks. And because of the leaks, we started to get information about what was really happening behind the scenes and how we're lied to. And so the cynicism, the skepticism towards politicians who never deliver anything at home, lie to us to get us into wars abroad, are consistently caught being corrupt, lying, serving the money bags of the city rather than the people who elected them. All of that's become kind of normalized and so evident to the mass of the working class that now nobody bats an eyelid when they're told a politician is corrupt or that he's lied, or it's, oh, well, that's what they do, isn't it? But we didn't used to think that way. In the post-war period, there was a sense that, somehow our politicians are there to represent us and that the state is on our side and that life is getting better for people because we've somehow discovered a civilized way forwards and we don't have to have a revolution to make life better. And isn't that nice? All of that's been being steadily undone. And there's a real crisis of legitimacy. But in particular, there's a crisis in social democracy. Social democracy, the parties in the imperialist countries that claim to be in some way socialist or pro-worker, but actually serve imperialism. The mask has come off those parties since the fall of the Soviet Union. The mask came off those parties instead of the kind of Clement Attlee version of, we're on the people's side. You got the Tony Blair kind of outright anti-communism, continuing Thatcher's attack on the trade unions and all of and supporting America's drive to war and all of that. So the mask has come off social democracy, and the decline of the living standards of the people has made them feel that their loyalty to the social democratic parties was misplaced, and they're angry. In fact, they're very angry, a lot of them, at the party they feel has really betrayed them and their interests. They've watched their industries disappear. They've watched their communities fall into the dust. Some of them rotting for now 3 generations with unemployment and drug addiction rife, and their housing falling into ruins and their communities just falling apart. It's a horrible situation for many, many working people in Western countries as a result of what's happened to us since the overproduction crisis kind of reasserted itself in the 80s, the shuttering of industry, and then the fall of the Soviet Union, which made our ruling classes feel very confident in attacking the pay conditions and provisions for working people, because they were like, look, there is no alternative. There's no alternative. So you guys just have to suck it up and do your best to sink or swim. And if you work hard, you'll be all right. So don't worry about it. Well, this crisis of legitimacy in social democracy is very destabilizing socially in the imperialist countries. And there's 2 tactics, both of which are played very heavily in our media. And it's another thing where we see this kind of use of the culture wars divide, an attempt to corral workers behind one or other representative, actually, of the ruling class and its system. So on the one hand, to those who are more are we still in the show? I'm going to keep talking and presume that Garland's coming back. To those who are... Okay, it says I'm live. So to those... That's really off-putting. To those who are more socialist minded, what we find is that
can you hear me?
I can hear you now, Garland. Okay. I can't tell if we're still live or not.
Give me 1 second. Continue. I've lost continue. I've lost everything. I've lost my power, but I get it right back.
Okay. So as I was saying, I'll try not to lose it now. That slightly freaked me out. So to those who are more progressively minded, what happens is workers are given this option of, this kind of narrative, a fear-based narrative that says, oh my gosh, the fascists are coming, and the only way to keep the fascists out is to keep voting for social democracy, keep supporting social democracies, stop thinking that there's a way to make life better by getting rid of the social democrats and organizing something separate that's genuinely for the working class. Because if you do that, you'll let the fascists in. And that's going to be really, really terrible. Fascism is the worst thing, isn't it? And of course, progressive people think, yes, fascism is the worst thing. We don't want fascism. Not really understanding that social democracy, as the late great Joseph Stalin said, social democracy is the moderate wing of fascism. And he said that because in every situation where the ruling class, the imperialist ruling class, is losing its grip on power, where it's worried about a rising working class movement, the social democrats have consistently acted to help the ruling class keep its power over the workers through bringing in fascist control when the workers are getting too strong to be controlled any other way. So to help them enact a kind of naked terroristic dictatorship of capital over the working class at a time when working class anger is rising and threatening to sweep the whole system away. Fascism is what naked fascism, naked brutal force is what the ruling class resorts to in those times of emergency. And every time it has done so in every country where it's happened, the social democrats have helped that process to take place, right? They've been anti-communist and pro-fascist every single time, and they've always done it in the name of democracy. We've got a very good pamphlet. Oh, I don't know if I can find it now. There's a very good pamphlet written by my father. You can find it on the website of the Stalin Society, called Bourgeois Democracy and Fascism, specifically focusing on the case of Nazi Germany. But, you know, you can apply that model to anywhere else where, you know, fascism has come to power. You'll see the same thing happening, where the social democrats facilitate that process and facilitate the crushing of the communists, right? Because what social democrats are more than anything is pro-imperialist. They're loyal servants of imperialism. So we have these two. So one narrative the ruling class is pushing now is for people who are scared about fascism, they say, oh, no, you've got to come back in behind the Labour Party, as it is in Britain, or the Democrats in America, or, you know, whoever, the Socialist Party, or whoever they have, Macron, I don't know, in France, or whoever, anybody who claims to be left but is actually social democratic, is actually supporting imperialism. So they try and herd us back in and tell us that we must not listen to the part of our brain that says these people have betrayed us constantly for the last 100 years. And actually, if we want to get free, we need something different. They play that side. On the other hand, for the people who that just doesn't wash with, for the people who have been the most betrayed by social democracy, by the Labour Party, what they have done is set up a controlled opposition. Now, you know it's a controlled opposition for two reasons. Number one, for all of the popular things they say, like we don't want war and we want better services and we want better wages and we want industry and blah, 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 all those things which get them votes and get the attention of people, the number one thing these forces talk about is immigration. So straight away you see they've got a divide and rule agenda that serves imperialism, that they're presented to us as disruptors, but there's nothing disruptive about this narrative. And what you see is if they actually get into power like Meloni did in Italy, then they get right in line with NATO and all the rest of it, you know, almost straight away. Every now and again, Meloni will say something that sounds a bit disruptive. But in reality, what has she done to disrupt NATO? Zero, nothing at all. She carries on spouting the same anti-immigrant filth to set Italian against Italian and to get sections of the Italian working class identifying with sections of the Italian ruling class, as it's looking to it for salvation from the system that is the problem, right? And we have this in every country. Nigel Farage, the same, you know, he's very much a controlled opposition. He's backed by, for example, the fracking lobby, you know, and he came out of the City of London. He's a city banker. And he pops up every time the ruling class feels like it's kind of losing control of the narrative and there are too many angry people. He kind of turns up. And then he kind of goes away again when they feel like they've got control of it again, and he goes away, and then he comes back again when they need him. It's kind of fascinating. But one of the ways you know it's a controlled opposition and not a real one is how much bloody press they get. And the press serves two functions. One is to kind of scare the more progressive-minded workers and go, oh my God, the rise of the right, the rise of the right, quick, 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 vote Labour. Although it's the Labour Party who've done more than any other force to oppress the people at home and wage war on them abroad, right? But this is what the kind of narrative is. Oh my God, the right's coming, we must vote Labour and get behind the nice, respectable Social Democrats. Or if not Labour, the Greens or SNP or Plaid, or, you know, another variant of social democracy. There's a few variants now of social democracy. They haven't just got one, precisely because so many people have realised that the emperor's wearing no clothes when it comes to the Labour Party itself. And again, you'll see this across all the other imperialist countries, the same pattern. But the press demonising these, you know, controlled rebellions actually, of course, as it's meant to do, serves the function of making a whole load of people go, well, if the establishment doesn't like them, I think they're for me, you know? But they're not offering anything. They're not offering any real hope for people. They're not offering them any real improvement in their lives, any escape from imperialist crisis and war. They're going to put a new branding on it. They say lots of what sound like anti-establishment and pro-worker things while they're far away from power. But you get these people into power, you'll see just what you saw with Meloni. The reality is it's a controlled opposition. It's not fascism. And you pointed out yourself, Garland, the fascists in Europe are in the EU bureaucracy. They're in the NATO command. they're in the government of all the Eastern European countries where fascists were parachuted back in, having been protected by Britain and America during the period of socialism in those countries. Then they were brought back and installed as new leaderships, basically puppet leaderships. You know, the Baltic states are puppets of Anglo-American imperialism. Those leaders were not, you know, didn't come from the people. They don't represent the people. They certainly don't represent the interests of the countries concerned. They're offering their people up. They don't care about their people at all, do they? Because they're offering them up as foot soldiers for the same cause that the Ukrainian people are currently being sacrificed for, which is, you know, this hope that if you can just find a way to have a second front, keep the war going a bit longer, the dream that Russia's going to fall apart will come to fruition, and you know, we'll have our looting, and, you know, what do I say, tea and buns for everybody.
You know, here's interesting that you've talked about it. It's obvious, so obvious here the way it happened. So nothing was happening. So finally, Bernie Sanders and AOC, right? They're out having and you start seeing all over the news, Bernie and AOC are having these fight the billionaire, fight the oligarchs, and there's 15,000 people there. And then all of a sudden, a couple of websites popped up that are directing these gigantic protests. The main one was this country, I might have talked about it, this organization called indivisible.org. Two people, one of them who was an advisor to the State Department under Obama, and the other was an advisor to the executive branch under Obama. One of them worked for the guy who was the executive director for George Soros's Open Society. The other person ran an NGO that was funded by BlackRock, right? So these people are leading the protest against the oligarchs, right? So now one of their associates has popped up. You're going to love this. So now we've got a new group. May 1st of all days, 50 protests, 50 states, one movement. Join us to uphold the Constitution and end executive overreach. Stop the billionaire takeover. We are the many, they are the few. So that's their thing, right? That's just you're going to love this. Their values, their controlled opposition, if there ever was. Commitment to inclusivity, an inclusive environment where everyone feels valued, respected, and empowered. What the hell does that have to do with fighting anyone? We're dedicated to promoting nonviolence. Listen to this. We're committed to fostering peaceful conflict resolution within states. Wait, what about war? No, we're all for war. We want peaceful conflict resolution within states by promoting diplomacy, mediation, blah, 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 right? Okay. So now here's what's interesting. If you look at their partners, oh boy. So I looked into this. So their partners are these 4 websites. These 4 websites, all 4 of these websites, when you look at the partners, they look very similar. They're all the same 4. So these 4 websites, you go to any of these websites and you look at their partners and they're all the same 4. So here's now this will tell you where they're. Voices of Florida. You're going to love this one. I'm just going to take a moment, but you got to see this. Okay, so Voices of Florida, a very important partner of theirs. Let's take a look. Voices of partner, right? Voices of Florida. Oh, what a wonderful website. Well, gee, let's look at.
They've got a shop though.
Let's look at their team. Oh, they've got apparently a trans person here. They've got empowered diverse women with there we go. Somebody's got a mask on, of course, multicolored hair, blue, red, green hair, all that. You know what I mean? You look at this and it's like, okay, you know, I know, but somewhere in there, if I'm not mistaken, they have their mission. It's a Black and queer-led organization. You know what I mean? You look at this and it's like, okay, so what you're telling us is you all are out there to fight the oligarchs, stand up against the system or something like that. And when you look at it and you read it, the only thing you see is words like inclusivity and things like that. And it's just, yes, Black and queer and diversity and all of this must stand up. Our mission is for, and you read it and it all means nothing. But here's the interesting thing about this movement. All over the news, everywhere that you see, the leaders are on CNN, MSNBC. What are you doing? May 1st, we're all going to be out there to fight the oligarchs. We're all standing up, and you look, and like literally Nancy Pelosi shows up, and she's a speaker at the Speaker of the House. Warmonger #1 is at their protest, speaking up against the oligarchs. A woman who came to Congress with nothing, and now she's worth $200 million. She's standing up to help them fight the oligarchs. Your thoughts about this? I mean, I'll put it like this. For people like us, we look at that and like, okay, we know there's controlled opposition, but do you have to be so obvious? Couldn't you be a little more fake there? It's kind of embarrassing for us, you know? Your thoughts?
It definitely stinks to high heaven, doesn't it, Garland? You know, what you see there is a manifestation of the fact that the ruling class understands it needs to reboot social democracy. Social democracy has lost traction amongst huge swathes of the working people, whether they consider themselves progressive or conservative. You know, for all the reasons we've said, that people's on the one hand, people's living standards have been getting so much worse. Their jobs have been destroyed, their communities destroyed, their services destroyed, you know, their infrastructure crumbling, all of those things. Their lives are getting worse by the day. On the other hand, they are extremely unhappy with the wars of spoliation and genocide that their ruling classes are involved in and leading. And this leads to a mass desertion by the masses from the camp of social democracy in the US. The US is not the classic case when it comes to social democracy, because, of course, the Democratic Party never identified as socialist in the way that most of the European social democratic parties originally did back before World War I. But it is the kind of equivalent in the sense that in your imperialist setup, the Democrats were seen as the party of, you know, anti-Jim Crow and pro-working class people, and you know, was the kind of the party that in modern times was seen as, you know, the friend of the working man. Now the massive working men and women no longer feel that way. You know, the Democrats have been massively exposed as anti-people, pro-monopoly, pro-war, right? So who is there who wants to line up and support that? Diminishing numbers of people. So what you see is a massive campaign to reboot social democracy, to paint it as anti-oligarch and anti-war, and, you know, hence this huge propaganda campaign. They're getting, you know, big load of media to back it up, lots and lots of money from various organizations. But as you say, controlled opposition. It's a bit like the way we point out in Britain that while Labour Party was waging its wars, the Labour Party was controlling the anti-war movement. I mean, it's a clever trick, isn't it? Well, you've got here, right, BlackRock v. BlackRock. What's that, right? That's telling you. But the truth is, if you're a real opposition, if you're really pro-working class, you know how you can tell? Because you don't get any mention. You get the opposite. You get suppression, full-on suppression of your movement by the ruling class, and no publicity, right? Our party, for example, every single one of our social media avenues, you can see that, you know, it's not just algorithms. There's a thumb firmly placed on the scales to stop our information getting out. There's a blanket on mentioning the name of our party in mainstream media, a blanket ban, sorry, on mentioning the name of our party in mainstream media. There is, if occasionally, accidentally our party gets mentioned, or in passing they sort of need to refer to us some way, they don't get the name right. You know, they do everything possible to stop people knowing about us, what our policies are, finding us. You know, I'll give you a little side example. Like, this is what happens if you're real opposition and not fake opposition. There was one time when I think it was Simon Sebag Montefiore had written a book called Young Stalin. He's a classic anti-communist historian, and, you know, this is obviously news, right? Because anti-communism is a very important strand, permanent strand of British broadcasting. So Channel 4 News were doing a segment on the publication of this book, because it's the news, right? That Stalin was young once, so someone's written a book about it. So they wanted to promote this book, obviously, and they did a segment on it. Now they were looking for someone, because they like to pretend they're balanced. Yeah, they like to have someone to make them look stupid for the other side, and then they've done their balance. My father was the chair of something called the Stalin Society in Britain. Now, obviously, to these goons, that seems like a laughable thing to have done, to set up something called the Stalin Society. They assume the guy who's in charge of or speaks for the Stalin Society is going to be some kind of muppet. They can make him look stupid for 2 minutes on the news, and there we have a good bit of balance, right? So they invited my father into the studio. Unfortunately, there was nobody on our side who went with him to take a video of that interview, because guess what? They talked to him for an hour. They couldn't find one clip that would make Stalin or the Stalin Society or Comrade Joti Brar look stupid, so they binned it. It never got aired. The segment, it was like Rapal never existed. Because, of course, it was pre-recorded. And one of the lessons we learned from that is if you're ever going to go on mainstream media, it's got to be live. Because they'll cut you, they'll edit you, they'll do something to stop your message getting across. But in general, they just, we don't get invited. That's the truth, right? But this is a little story just to illustrate to you how the media works to prop up the system, and it serves the ruling class and the ruling class's narrative. And if they are presenting you with a disruptive alternative, the main thing you should understand is there's a reason they're presenting that to you, that they want to make sure that when people are too angry and disenfranchised with the standard options of Tory, Liberal, Labour, Green, that they can be herded in behind something that is also under ruling class control. And you talked about that, with this oligarch funded movement. We have exactly the same with what's called the far right in Britain. It was UKIP, then it was the Brexit Party, now it's Reform. It was always Nigel Farage in charge of it. This controlled opposition, and we see it with the AfD in Germany. We see it with Meloni in Italy. We see it with Le Pen in France. And really, you have to look at the huge amount of propaganda these parties are getting as part of very much a kind of attempt to create culture wars type divisions amongst the ranks of the working class, to herd disenfranchised, angry members of the working class back behind different representatives of people who are actually representing their class enemies.
Wow. One of the things we're going to have to get, I don't know, not now, I got to get ready to go, but, and I'm glad one of our people in the chat mentioned it. And I don't know how much you've been paying attention to Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traore, who's been doing a yeoman's work there in changing. But now I saw something the other day, and they had, of course, they've now put a black guy in front of and in charge of AFRICOM, General Langley or something like that. And he was talking about Burkina Faso and Ibrahim Traore, the terrible things that's going on there and how he's doing things. And what do you know, within days after he says that, Burkina Faso thwarts major coup plot targeting junta leader. But about a week or so before that, I saw something on other articles that said the Russians are going to help provide military assistance to Burkina Faso and other Sahel countries to help defend themselves. And I think, here's what I think. The Russians had the intel that the imperialists were going to try to overthrow and do terrible things. And they were maybe sending out the message, hey, we're going to push back against that. But bottom line is the Sahel region in Africa, the Burkina Fasos, the Malis, et cetera, are saying we want out of French imperialism. And the Westerners, the imperialists just don't walk away like that. They're kind of regrouping, and now they're going to try to make their move again for the Sahel. Obviously, I think there's just too much. There's gold and what's the other big thing? Uranium. You're not going to walk away from that easy. But at any rate, thank you very much. Did you have a final comment on that before you go?
I was just going to say, Garland, while imperialism continues to exist, no liberated territory is safe from their machinations. They don't stop trying to assassinate Hugo Chavez. They don't stop trying to destroy Russia and China. They don't stop trying to destroy Iran and the DPRK. That, you know, everywhere where there's a leader trying to, or a government trying to be sovereign, trying to be independent, trying to bring development to their people at the expense of the profiteering of the corporations, you will find the imperialists are in there throwing money at organizations that are trying to organize coups and black ops and assassinations and everything they can do, paying. I mean, just very briefly on this topic of fascism, let it be noted that both in Minsk and I think Moscow this week, but last year it was Minsk, there's been a new anti-fascist formation there. Yes. Based on the fact that they are facing this very real resurgence of fascism funded by the West, aimed at their whole society. The same thing's happening in Latin America. The Venezuelans are heading up an anti-fascist international because they too are facing what fascist forces on their streets who are directly paid. They're mercenaries, basically, by the USA in order to try to destabilize the country, destroy its facilities, you know, and disrupt the process of the revolution over there. And we're going to keep seeing this until such a time as imperialism is beaten and got rid of. And this is something that I think we have to really understand fundamentally. It's like the people abroad can get themselves liberated as far as they can and work on building themselves to be strong and sovereign and independent. But the final blow against imperialism has to come at home, and nobody in the world is safe, including ourselves, until we organize the defeat of our own imperialist powers on the home front.
Thank you very much. Tell everybody where they can find all your stuff. I know you've got Proletarian TV, which usually on YouTube, which usually puts our stuff up, but where should people go to find various things that you're involved in?
That's right. So we've got Proletarian TV on YouTube. We have a party Telegram channel, The Communists, as it says down there. My name, I have a Telegram channel, Joti Brar, just my name. And then if you come to our party website, thecommunists.org, it has a tremendous array of fantastic Marxist analysis on all the important topics of the day. And you can also get our Marxist education program there, which anybody can start to work their way through. It's got sort of beginner materials as well as more advanced ones on every important topic. So I encourage you to come to our website, have a look around, sign up for our newsletters and get involved.
Joti Brar, thank you very much. Certainly appreciate it and hope to talk to you soon. Everybody, don't forget, check out all of the sites and the locations online that Joti has given you. Follow me on Rockfin and Rumble, just in case YouTube gets rid of anything. You can always find the videos and share them elsewhere. Share this on all your social media platforms. Make sure you subscribe. Click the join button if you can join. And as I said, what's important about alternative media, you know, Joti, and this kind of stuff, the kind of discussions that we have on this channel and in alternative media, they just don't get the play on the airwaves or anything like that. And in fact, they're usually algorithmically suppressed. So it's important that all 390 people in the chat share this on all your social media platforms. Thanks a lot. We're out.